I'm almost ashamed that we're just sitting here talking about it, to tell you the truth. This girl needs help. We should be doing everything we can to prevent this killing, this calculated state-sponsored killing of this young woman.
Thanks for joining the Father Emmanuel Lemelson Podcast, which reveals the darkest corners of government, corporate America, and culture with commentary from an Orthodox Christian perspective. Join our co-host, Theodora Lemelson, for another thought-provoking episode as we question the imminent state-sanctioned killing of Zoraya Ter Beek, the modern disregard for the sanctity of human life and the loss of hope among our youth. Sit back, tune in, and be ready to challenge your beliefs.
A physically healthy 28-year-old Dutch woman has decided to end her life, purportedly due to her struggles with, quote, crippling depression, autism, and borderline personality disorder, according to a recent report. Zoraya Ter Beek, a woman from the Netherlands, who is, in her words, quote, in love with her boyfriend, is scheduled to be, quote, legally euthanized next month. Ter Beek, who aspired to be a psychiatrist, has dealt with mental health challenges throughout her life. She said she decided to be euthanized after her doctors told her, quote, there's nothing more we can do for you. It's never going to get any better, according to the Free Press. How should we think about her affliction and her doctor's words?
Well, if those were the words of her doctors, maybe they should be euthanized. Who are they to say that she'll never get better? The fact is that all of these ailments she's suffering from, I mean, she's physically healthy, but these mental ailments, they are all addressable. They can be treated. Depression, for example, is fairly widespread. It's a part of life. I think something like 37% of women in the United States, for example, suffer from depression. Not that that's a good statistic, but sometimes depression is a sign that something's wrong in our life, that we need to change. Or it could be simply a sign that we've come closer to God and we realize how unworthy we are and how far most of the world is as well. In terms of her autism, many geniuses throughout history have been autistic. It shouldn't be an impediment to living life. And it seems to me that her autism cannot be very severe if she's involved in an emotionally nurturing relationship. She loves her boyfriend, so she can feel and sense emotions and connect emotionally. In terms of borderline personality disorder, it's a fairly vague description. Who's to say what a disordered personality is? Personality is something we're inherited at birth. But my understanding of borderline personality disorder is that these people are often impulsive or impetuous. And if that's the case, if they act out of emotion before considering the consequences, then a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder would be the precise reason not to move forward with a suicide. I'm not sure the Dutch authorities are thinking through that very much. Not that the Dutch authorities can be credited with thinking through very much of anything if they approved assisted suicide law. Assisted suicide, or medically assisted suicide, physician-assisted suicide, whatever you want to call it, at the end of the day is suicide for the person dying. You don't have the right to take your own life. You didn't give yourself life, so you cannot take it. For the physician who assists, it's a calculated form of killing. It's a type of murder. This has to be distinguished from physicians who perhaps withhold extraordinary measures in an effort to prolong life. There's no ethical or moral prohibition on that. But this is different. Proactively assisting, essentially poisoning a person until their heart stops, is a very, very different matter altogether. And the definition of murder, you might say, well, murder is a very strong word, but the definition of murder is one human being in a calculated effort taking the life of another human being. You might say, but this is lawful according to Dutch law. But we have to take a look at what the law is. The law of man is nebulous and ever-changing, but God's law is not. And the Sixth Commandment says, thou shalt not kill. So, to me, to say this is in any way lawful is absurd. There's nothing lawful about the taking of a life, much less a young life. The fact is, she's 28. And we know that if borderline personality disorder is in part to blame for this suicidal ideation, we know that the symptoms of that condition, they're mitigated over time. people to a certain extent not only can be treated in early adulthood, but will naturally grow out of some of the severe emotional effects of that condition. In terms of depression, who amongst us has not felt depressed from time to time? Some of the greatest figures in history suffered from great bouts of depression. I think of Winston Churchill, for example. He referred to the black dog, which was his personal bout with these feelings of sorrow and hopelessness. He went on to become one of the great leaders in history, I think. There was 350,000 people who witnessed his funeral in person. I think 350 million overall, globally. Had he taken his own life merely out of depression, who knows what the world would look like today? So the real issue here is hopelessness, and this young person, tragically, is living without hope, and in my estimation, almost certainly a hope that a loving communion with other people maybe is not real, and maybe can't be counted on, which would have a logical and reasonable connection to a borderline personality disorder. But these doctors telling her it will never get better, robbing her of hope, these are not doctors who really care for this patient. They don't have her best interest in mind. So it's really very, very tragic that this girl, who I think is really reaching out and asking for help, that those around her seem to come as angels of light with a so-called compassion or a mercy. But these are no angels. These are angels of death, is what they are, and they come as an angel of light.
According to media reports, Zoraya, in an apparent sign of her hopelessness, has a tattoo of a, quote, tree of life on her upper left arm, but, quote, in reverse. The young woman said, quote, "Where the tree of life stands for growth and new beginnings, my tree is the opposite. It is losing its leaves. It is dying. And once the tree died, the bird flew out of it. I don't see it as my soul leaving, but more as myself being freed from life." She also commented, quote, "I'm not going anywhere." But then at other times stated, quote, "I'm a little afraid of dying because it's the ultimate unknown. And, quote, we don't really know what's next. Or is there nothing? That's the scary part." What do we make of these comments?
Well, I think these doctors surrounding her are probably atheistic humanists, but I don't actually think that she is. At first, you would think that she's saying there's a sort of nihilism driving her, but she clearly delineates from her seeming immortal sense of self, her soul, and the physical life that we have in this world. She constantly delineates between those two, even subtly. She may not be aware of it. She says she's not going anywhere, but then she says that she's not sure what's to come next. So she tacitly acknowledges that there's perhaps a life to come, that the soul is in fact immortal, and that there's a reason to live, and to live a certain way in this life, and that there's more to it than just the pain and suffering and hopelessness of this world. And I definitely believe that this girl is crying out for help. And it's sad, actually, that our responses have been thus far largely political. There's nothing political about this girl's life. It's sacred. If there was someone standing on the edge of a building ready to jump, it used to be that we would reach out and try to help them, prevent them. Now we rush to pump them full of sedatives that will stop their heart. What does this come to, and how did we get here? I think this girl is crying out for help, and I wish I could reach her, actually.
The imminent killing of this physically healthy young woman has been described in the media rather casually and in political terms. She's one of many in the West, including a growing number of healthy young people choosing death rather than continue living in pain that, unlike a terminal illness, could be treated. This includes solvable mental health problems like depression or anxiety. Media reports describe the May 2024 procedure in the following way. A doctor will first give her a sedative, followed by a drug that will stop her heart. Her boyfriend will be at her side until the end. Ter Beek said, quote, "The doctor really takes her time. It is not that they walk in and say, 'Lay down, please.' Most of the time it is first a cup of coffee to settle the nerves and create a soft atmosphere. Then she asks if I'm ready. I'll take my place on the couch. She will once again ask if I'm sure, and she will start up the procedure and wish me a good journey. Or in my case, a nice nap, because I hate it if people say safe journey. These are ominous words.
The description of this medical procedure, I don't even know if we can call it that. It's macabre. It sounds like a horror movie to me. This epidemic of suicide that's growing, and the widespread increase in social norming of physician-assisted suicide, so-called physician-assisted suicide, is a plague on humanity. What is causing this hopelessness amongst the people, amongst the young people, when they have so much to live for? They have their youth. They have marriage to look forward to, family life, children, career, accomplishments. I think it's the absence of faith. Without faith, people begin to see the world as transient, temporal, perhaps unreal. But this desire to control outcomes, to believe that we can exert our will over everything, including death, and when it arrives, it's a myth. It's a lie. And maybe in a society preoccupied with the advancements of medical technology, which still, as advanced as it is today, struggles to control death, maybe physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia is a logical outcome for something that cannot be controlled, is to say, I finally take this into my own hands and control it myself. But euthanasia, or the Greek good death, this is not a good death. This is not a dignified death. This idea that we have forgone all hope in place stands only sorrow, stands a sense of being forlorn, to be alone in the world, as I said earlier, may be a loss in the belief that there's a loving communion between us as human beings. And it's unique to humans, indeed. Maybe people will say, we have no faith in God. There isn't a transcendent God, much less a God of love, a God of resurrection, a Christ that the dead are united to, that there's a resurrection of the body. But then, are we merely animals? Because in the history of the world, as far as I know, no animal has ever committed suicide, nor has an animal helped another animal to die merely to avoid discomfort, pain, or suffering. That would seem to indicate that human beings are something more than animals, that we have a consciousness, a sense of our divinity, of being made for the eternal that separates us from the animal kingdom. And so, as we look at this analogy, something else striking occurs. Animals can lay down their life, only not to avoid suffering. There's countless examples, for example, of service dogs putting their life on the line or at risk, losing their life, to serve their masters, to preserve life of the other. And in this sense, we think about love and death, life and death. See, life can be taken or ended where it gives life. In fact, in the moment of conception, in a way, in that moment of ecstasy that gives rise to new life, there's also an imminent and sudden impotence following the loss of life. Something goes out from that conjugal relationship, a sort of small step towards dying. But it's a dying which leads to new life. So the idea that life can end, or that one's life can be taken, but only where it will give rise to new life, exists through all of creation. But not this, not the taking of life, only to avoid pain and suffering. Human beings struggle really with death. They struggle because it's the ripping away of what they love. anyone who's lost a loved one will tell you that death haunts them, that it can come suddenly without explanation. But the reconciliation between death and the pain it brings about, or the fear that she discusses, is not a problem that has various degrees of explanation. There is no rational explanation. In fact, there's not even a problem. The answer to reconciling those two things is more simple and more profound than human reason can imagine. And it is reconciled in the resurrection. The thought that death has in fact been overcome, that a sacrifice beyond price has been paid. These opportunities for suffering, and I say they're opportunities because they truly are, ought not to lead to the end of life, because life is sacred. It's a gift. And where we've come to in our society, where so-called doctors lead the healthy, who are struggling, who are in despair, lead them to take their life, should be shocking. And there isn't wholly without an element of greed. The pharmaceutical companies stand to profit from this. In fact, I believe it's secobarbital, the drug which is most commonly used. That's a drug that used to cost less than $200 for 100 pills. But in 2015, just before California became one of the early states to legalize physician-assisted suicide, a company formerly known as Valiant, today it's known as the Bosch companies, acquired that drug. And within a few years, the price had risen to $3,000 for 100 pills. Currently, it's just under $4,000 for the same dose. These companies, I often have said, will kill for profits. And it's not an exaggeration. There's a vested interest. There's still a money trail. People will profit from this. And to what extent the medical profession and these so-called doctors also profit from this warrants careful scrutiny. But we're living now in a society and in a culture of death, not in a culture of life. And it should be alarming to all of us. I'm almost ashamed that we're just sitting here talking about it, to tell you the truth. This girl needs help. We should be doing everything we can to prevent this killing, this calculated state-sponsored killing of this young woman. She's confused. She has enablers around her. She has Big Pharma profiting from this. I wish this message could get to her somehow, and that someone could just tell her that it will get better, that there's so many wonderful and beautiful things to live for, and that they emerge from our suffering, from our pain, even our depression. Those things are the groundwork to make everything in life so worth living. There's a paradox in suffering, and that is that joy can emerge from it. She can taste joy again, but not with these people around her. She doesn't need these psychiatrists. She needs the love of God. She needs the love of family. I just pray that somehow this avoidable death, this one avoidable death, will not happen. Because tied up in that person is the value of all life. We're all part of a human family. If we stand by idly or callously and we politicize the issue, or we simply use it for commentary, shame on us. Shame on us. This girl must be saved, and we should do everything we can to save her. Plain and simple.